And we're live, I think. Well, hello everybody. Welcome to week four of our sew along with I'm gonna just start all over again. Welcome to week 4 of our Cindy B sew along. We're doing the constellation quilt this month. So on our paper here, you can see that we're actually going to be sewing together block 1.
Can we get some hellos in the chat?
Maybe it's all this beautiful weather that we have outside that's made my tongue tied. I just want to be out there in the sun. Okay, so what we had to do is cut according to what our pattern said, and then we also have to find the units that we made last week, as well as the flying geese that we made with the background color and our bee fabric. So we're going to need those a little bit later on. But first off, what we're going to do here, is this in the camera, Tiff?
Oh, we have a hello from Sue, who's from Massey.
Perfect. Nice. So we're going to be making this unit right here, and it's called a forward patch. It's one of the very common blocks that have been around forever. So there's 2 ways you could make this block. So they are 2-inch finished. It's a 4.5-inch block. So you would be cutting squares 2.5 inches and sewing the squares together, or we are going to strip piece. So strip piecing basically means we are going to take our strips and we are going to sew them together, and then we're going to cut them again into the units that we have. So at the end of the day, you work out to be exactly the same thing as what it was before. But it's just a neat way of doing it. We're not working with little squares. We're just working with strips.
I do want to apologize for if I'm coughing during the stream today. I have a cold.
So,
I can't help it.
One thing that we did is my fabric came with fat quarters. So I had to cut 2 strips of my fabric C. My fabric D was long fabric. So I have 1 long strip. So I'm just going to take my scissors and cut it across the fold. So now I have a piece to go with both of my strips.
If you have 2 long strips, you do not have to cut them in half.
You will eventually.
No, you won't. Not in half.
You won't. No, you won't. You're good. Yeah. You have to cut them in pieces.
You'll cut them eventually, but not in half. If you have 2 long strips, just match up the whole strip.
So I'm just going to take my 2 fabrics, and it doesn't matter which one I put on top. It's not going to matter in the long run. And then I am going to sew them together with my perfect 1/4 inch seam. You can pin it, or if you're like me and you don't want to pin, just make sure, like I have my fabric starched, so I don't have a lot of stretch like we used to. So things go together very nicely.
You also have a FOF with an IDT.
I do. IDT is this little gadget right here at the back, and it's like a built-in walking foot that keeps my layers together a little bit better. So I always want to sew in between my fingers. We talked about that last week, I believe. So I'm going to line up my edges. So in between my fingers, it's perfectly lined up. I'm going to use my guide and my 1/4 inch foot, holding my left hand on the side of my strip, and I will only sew up to my fingers. Because you can see down at the bottom, it's just not lined up. So then I'm going to stop with my needle in the down position. It's going to hold my fabrics, and I am going to line these up. Again, you can see I'm not stretching, I'm not pulling. I just want things to lay nice and flat together. And then we'll sew the rest of the strip. down to the end. I'm trying not to talk all the way through. Now, if I was going to do this second strip, and I would if it was, if I was at home or just sewing it all together, I would just feed this one in and continue sewing. But I don't need that one right now. So now I am going to take my fabric and I want to press it towards the darker one. So in this case, it is my C fabric, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it is. So now when I press a long unit like this, it could have a tendency to bow. So I want to try really hard to make sure I keep it straight. And one of the ways I do that is I took a Sharpie marker and I drew on my wool mat or on my ironing board, if you just have an ironing board cover, I drew a straight line. And that's going to help me line up my strip. So then what I'm going to do is, whoops, I forgot to charge up my iron. I'm just going to give it a second. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to set my seam, and then when we press it, I'm going to use this to keep it as straight as I can. I don't want to use steam because steam can also set curves into fabric. You can make a real curved boomerang out of this. So I set my seam.
Oh, your steam's on.
I'm going to open it up and I'm holding it on my wool mat, keeping it from shifting. And when I set it on my wool mat too, I can even give it a little shot of steam and it will literally, it doesn't stick to the wool mat, but it sticks a little bit. So then I would do the 2 strips. I'm just going to move this out of the way. So now that we have our strip cut, I want to take my ruler and I want to measure this. I want to make sure that this measures exactly 4.5. So there's my 4.5, and I'm going to measure it along my strip in a couple different places to make sure that it's consistently at 4.5 inches. It's much easier to unsew it right now than later. Again, so now when I'm cutting, I'm going to just place it on my board, and I am going to again use one of the lines of my mat this time to keep everything nice and straight. So now when I cut with my cutter, I am not, I'll turn it around because I'm right-handed. So I am not going to place the line of my ruler in the bottom of my fabric. What I want to stay straight for sure, this can go a little wonky because it's not sewn into anything. I want to make sure that this center seam stays straight in my quilt so I don't have blocks that are twisting. So I'm going to take a line of my ruler, and it doesn't matter which one, and I am just going to line it up on my seam. So it's nice and straight along my seam, and then I'm just going to trim off and cut myself that straight edge. I can flip it around again. Because it's a little piece of fabric, I can successfully flip it around. And now I'm going to cut 2.5 inch pieces off of this. Our strips were 2.5, so now I'm going to be cutting 2.5. So I'm going to take my 2.5 inch line, and I'm lining it up on the edge of my ruler, and I'm going to take another line and I am going to line it up on that seam to make sure everything stays straight. And I am just going to cut this down into units. And you would do the whole length of the strip because we need, what are we doing here? 6? We need 12 pieces that look like this. I'm just going to cut 2 more because I wanted to mention chain piecing to you. We've talked about it over the first few weeks. And I never really showed you what chain piecing is.
Yeah, you did last week.
Did we?
Yeah.
Okay, so there's my pins. So what I've got now is I've got my units. And all I'm going to do is take half of my units and I'm going to flip them together. We need to match this seam and we want it to be as perfect as it can be. So, did you need to come closer here today, Tiff?
Where are you going? In front of the sewing machine?
Yeah. What I want to do is I want to nest these seams. Nesting just means that I have one seam allowance going in one direction, one seam allowance going in the other direction, and I want to line up my seam perfectly. So I know you can't feel it, but I'm just going to go and show you. If I feel this right here, I've got a lump, and if I peek, you can see that they're not lined up, that my C fabrics are over top of each other. So if I move it over and I actually feel, I can even see some daylight, lighter spot in the center. I can feel sort of like a valley. They're not lined up that way. So what I like to do is I like to place it on so it's just a little bit over, and I am just going to roll it with my fingers. And I can feel exactly when it turns nice and flat that it will be, let's just peek, it will be lined up absolutely perfect. Your fingers will learn how to do this, and it can feel that if it's not lined up properly, it just may take some practice. So because I've taken all that time to line that up perfectly, I want to put a pin in there. I can also put a pin at the ends if I like. So I'm going to put a pin at the end here and a pin here. Now I don't have any fabric for a leader. Don't have a leader. Oh wait, I've got a piece of salvage here. So I do love to use the leaders. So it's going to reduce the amount of thread that I need to use. But it's also going to keep all that thread at the back. It's not going to make a rat's nest, and it will help pull my fabric through. So I'm going to line up this edge perfectly. I am going to butt it up against my needle. My foot is up just a little bit. This sewing machine, the foot comes up automatically, but if you didn't, you would just lift your lever and open it up a little bit, and we will sew. So once I get it started again, something could have shifted there. So I want to make sure that I'm good up until my pin. I can even make sure that this is still good here, and I can sew. I don't want to sew over my pin, so I'm going to sew right up to my pin. I want to keep that seam lined up perfectly. There. So now that I'm past my seam, I can stop with my needle in the down position. I can line up the rest of this, and I can sew to the end. Again, remember, once you get to the end, it's going to want to shift sideways. Because I have the pin here, I can just grab it and hold it. Or you can also use, I had a purple thing here.
It's behind your sewing machine.
There it is. You can use your purple thing and hold it exactly where you want it to be. So now that I've sewn my first unit, I'm going to stop. I'm going to grab my second unit. And I have stitched about 1 or 2 stitches past the edge of my block. And I've nested these seams absolutely perfectly, or as perfect as I can. I'm going to give that a little pin. And when I pin, you can see that I pinned on the top. That's holding my seam allowance on the bottom from flipping down. Nice tip that I forgot to tell you with the first one. So I'm pinning on the top of my seam to control that back seam allowance. So everything's lined up, and off I go. Lining everything up, making sure it's all good. Sewing up to my pin. I'm not taking it all the way out, I'm just grabbing it. Now that I'm close, I can pull it all the way out. and down to the bottom. So I'm just going to flip my mat over here so I have my pressing side, and then I am just going to clip these off and we're good to go. So now what I want to do is I want to spin this seam. If I just pressed it in this direction like this, you could probably even see how bulky it is at that spot. So what I want to do is I want to press the seams in opposite directions. So I've just got a long, straight, strong pin here. This is the seam that I just sewed. I want to unsew down to that seam on this side. Excuse me, I have to use my supervision here.
Not cutting the thread, just pulling the stitches out.
Exactly, I'm just unsewing it. I want it to be down to that seam, and I want to leave this here. The seam that I just sewed is holding those from unraveling. So I'm going to turn my unit over, and there is seam allowance stitches right there again in my seam allowance, and I want to undo those. So now when I open it up, you can see here this was pressed left, this one is pressed right. If I take these,
Hold on.
You see a little bit better?
Let me try and get a better position. Okay, try again.
So this one's pressed left, this one's pressed right. If I just keep my seams going in that same direction, give it a little press, I'll find a little floor patch right in the center. So I'm going to grab that and I'm going to flip it over. If I press from this edge, I'm probably going to get some foldy overs, and I really don't want that to happen. So now I can feel the direction that my seam is going, and I can just press. And now I have that spun. So I don't know if you could see the difference here. If I open this one like this, can you see actually how thick it is right there? That would be if I just pressed it in a regular motion.
I personally can see it. I don't know if they can see it online.
So then this one, you can see that the seam was pressed in one direction. This one, that their seams are spun, and it lays so nice and flat. Again, just unpicking down to the stitching on both sides, opening it up, pressing in the direction, using my finger to open that little four patch up, grabbing it, and I'm flipping it down onto my wool mat. And now I am going to press my seams open, and like magic, it's nice and flat. Now I want to measure these. These should be measuring 4.5. I don't have a square here, so we'll just use this ruler, which will work. So I've got 4.5 and 4.5. Yep, I think we are good.
Oh, good. They said yes, we can see it.
Okay, perfect. Right here on the block, I've just got a couple little threads over here on this corner. I'm not going to trim them off because that's probably just when I pressed with the iron, it stretched a little bit, but it's predominantly 4.5, so I'm happy with this. I'm not going to fix the seam. I'm just going to live this way. All right.
If it was up to, what do you think, 1/8 of an inch out, I would.
Yeah, if it was a little bit more than that, I would fix the seam because things will go wonky if it's not, fairly straight. But I'm just out a couple threads. So now the next thing that we have to do is we have to sew our 2.5 by 4.5 inch background strip to our flying geese. So I'll take 4 of those.
Actually, I'll take the one with the B.
The B, thank you. And I need 4 of our
I think I gave you 4.
So I want to sew our rectangle to the edge that has the 2 points. And I am going to turn my unit this way because what I want to do is I want to sew with my seams on top so I can control them and see where they're going.
Come closer there.
All right. So let's just get this in there. There we go. Again. Everything was squared up to 2.5 by 4.5, so everything should be good. If it doesn't measure the same, the 2 units don't measure the same length, something's cut wrong. So then we can check on that. So I am going to take a pin and I'm going to pin this corner to keep it in line. And then I am going to line up this corner perfectly. And I've lined it up down where my fingers can hold it. And now I'm going to sew. Again, just down to my fingers because I don't know what's happening here. So now I can straighten my unit out, make sure everything's nice and straight. My edges are all aligned. And now I can sew the rest of my seam. Again, holding my left hand that'll hold it and go beside my foot. And I'm going to need 4 of these, so I'm just going to continue on sewing, making sure these are right side together. So this would be a great time to ask some questions.
You will need 24 of those, but 4 for 1 block.
Correct.
Just wanted to point that out.
We're going to be making 6 blocks, and this week there is not anything extra for the ladies or the people that are making the queen size. We just need to sew these 6 blocks together. There's 2. Oops, I have an extra goose there. Well, with the weather out there today, it sure feels like spring. The water, the snow is melting, the water's running. You people that do maple syrup, has the trees started sapping or whatever it's called? Yeah.
Running. The trees
running. Thank you. I knew there was a word. Yeah, I think. Has the sap started running? That's what it would be. Okay. Lining everything up. So this quilt is going to get us right through the ugly spring weather, the the dirty, yucky, snow running, slushy kind of weather, and it should be done before we have to start working in our gardens, which I have found that a lot of quilters have gardens. I think it's the color. I think it goes hand in hand. Again, just checked, make sure everything was lined up. And I'm just going to cut these apart because I have it here. I'm just using the cutter on the side of my sewing machine. Another little tip that sometimes we forget to tell you. And now what I want to do is I want to press this towards my background fabric. It's going to want to do that anyways because the corners of our geese are so thick. It's not going to want to fold that way. So why should we struggle? Let's just let it do what it wants to do. So I'm going to place it because I'm pressing my seam towards the rectangle. I'm going to place the rectangle on the top. I am going to set my seam. I am just going to hold it with my fingers, opening it up, and press. Now I can do these one at a time. I can also put one on top of the other. You can see that I have not lined up my seams. I want to make sure that it's staggered enough that I'm pressing on a place that has no seams, and that way what's ending up happening is that the bottom units are getting extra heat, extra steam, so I'm getting a nice crisp fold, and it's just a little faster. And you can see that I opened it with my fingers. So I opened it with my fingers first before I pressed. So now what I'm going to do is I am going to grab my design board, and we're just going to put these to the side. Thank you, Tiffany. And we're going to get all our units. Oh, before we do that, I do want to make sure that these flying geese units are measuring 4.5 by 4.5, and they are. And I do test it all the time. You know, today's a new day. So that doesn't mean necessarily my seam, if it was perfect yesterday, that it's going to be perfect today. I do like to test at least the first unit and keep it going from there. So I am just going to use the diagram the way it will be on the paper that Tiffany will be downloading today. So you will get one of the diagrams. And I am just going to place our units. So our 4 patches in the middle. I want my C on the right.
That's the left.
The left, my other right. So I'm putting my C units going in this direction. And yes, we will be able to flip the block, but we're just worried about seam allowance pressing. So I'm just going to make sure that I do it according to what the pattern is. My geese will be on all 4 sides of my 4 patch. And these bordered squares will be going in the corners with the little K fabric corner pointing out. So there we have it. So now all we're going to do is sew it together in rows. So I'm going to sew a row, a row, a row, and then I'm going to sew them all together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my first 2 blocks and I can fold it right side up,
Right side together.
right side together. And I close it kind of like a book because this is the seam that I want to sew. Now I can pick it up and go to my sewing machine and sew it. Here's why. If you turn and fold it this way, you have to flip your block to find that side. And you might only flip it once or flip it twice and end up sewing on the wrong side. So I have trained my brain that I always take the one on the right, fold it right sides together to the one on the left, and this is the seam that I'm going to be sewing. I find repetition works really well for me, that if I have a reason or a way to do something, if I continue doing it, I don't really have to think so much about what I am doing. So I've lined up this corner and I've pinned it, and I've lined up that corner, and I'm going to start. We have some seams. We want to make sure if we have seams that they're lying in the right direction on the bottom. And if we cut our, can you zoom in here, Tiffany? If we cut our flying geese properly, you can see that there's an intersection right here. That should be intersecting right at the 1/4 inch. So when I go to sew, I want my seam to go right there. So let's see how good it is. So now that's very thick. So I want to take my time. I've been doing a lot of sewing lately, so I actually just changed my needle this morning, so I have a good sharp needle in there, so I shouldn't have any problem. If it starts, if your quilt starts having a hard time on the thickness, sometimes it's ready to change the needle. A needle should be changed every 6 to 8 hours of actual sewing. Not the time that you're in your sewing room, but the time that the needle goes up and down. So I've slowed down my stitching, and I want to guide this so my stitching hit that intersection. And now that it has, I can align this edge up. It moved a little bit on me, so I'm just lining it back up. Now I could pick up the next block, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this and we're going to check and see how good I did. So if I open this up, where are you?
I'm going to follow you.
Okay, so now you can see that I don't have a flat point. I've got a nice sharp point on my goose. We try so hard to make these points. I'm going to try to keep as many of them as I can. Sometimes I might miss one, but this one looks pretty good. So here's one thing. So I sewed this one. I could have had this left in my machine and I could pick up the next two and the next two, or I could lay it back down and sew this one on and finish the whole row. That's actually a personal preference, whatever you want to do, whatever makes more sense in your brain. We all have our own kind of ways of doing things. Okay. Now this block here, if we lined it up absolutely perfectly, this point right here of the nose of my goose will line up exactly with the straight line on our forepatch. And I can test that if I want. I can just place a pin right in the corner of that goose, right in a 1/4 inch down on our seam, and it should line up absolutely perfect. I can jiggle my needle until it is actually perfectly perpendicular, and once it's lined up like that, I can stick another pin in there and that will hold it in place. If you're pretty confident in your sewing, you don't necessarily have to do that pin matching, but if you want it to be exactly precise, go ahead. It's up to you. Remember now, a lot of you ladies that are beginners, I've been sewing for a long time, so things line up better. Give yourself that opportunity to try the best that you can and get things lined up and, you know, the best that you can. But if they're off a little bit, don't stress it out too much. If you could see some of the first quilts that I did, I lost points and things weren't lined up, but that's okay. I grew and I improved, and you look at it as a learning opportunity. Again, I hit that intersection of the seam with my new seam. And I'm just going to cut this so we can take a peek. If I had 2 leaders, I could have just fed another leader into it. So let's take a peek. Excuse me. So now the point of our goose is matching up perfectly with the seam of our forepatch. And we will be pressing this seam towards our forepatch. Okay. And then I'm going to go to the next one. Again, there's nothing that has to be lined up on this one except the 2 outside edges. I want to make sure I have a seam going up here at the top. I want to make sure that it stays pointing up, that it doesn't get flipped on our sewing machine.
Sometimes if I have seams that I'm worried about flipping, I will just put a pin in it.
Yeah. So we could do that if you want. We could just put a pin in it. But I
don't have to worry.
But I didn't line up my top.
Yes, you do have to line it up first.
I didn't, yeah. Okay, so now I'm going to stop. I feel that. I just want to make sure that it's going in the right direction. I'm lining everything up here. And I want my seam to intersect there. Perfect. So I can just leave this in my machine now because we've checked those seams. Everything is good. Got my leader. I can now just go to my first row again, and I'm just going to grab the next block. You noticed I was placing them the way that they were lined up, just to keep everything going in the right direction. So now I can take my next piece on the right, flip it over to the left, lining up my seams and sewing this one on our unit. And remember, whichever way works better for you. If you want to cut each unit, put it back down every time you sew a seams to keep everything lined up, that's perfectly fine. Just remember to trim the thread ends at the end.
We have a hello from Frankfurt, from Tim. I don't know if Tim is a husband or if Tim is actually sewing with us.
That would be awesome.
I also have a hello from Barbara from Trenton.
Frankfurt. I'm thinking that's Frankfurt, Ontario, and not Frankfurt, Germany. But that would be pretty cool too. On to my next one. Flipping right sides together. Again, I have that intersection here. I want to make sure that's lined up, and I'm going to eyeball this one. You can always use the pin if you want, but I'm pretty good at eyeballing now that I can see this intersection and the seam allowance. I'm still going to put a pin in there though.
I always line it up with the pin.
You always line up with the pin?
I try and eyeball and I fail.
Yeah.
I shouldn't say I always line up with a pin. It's just when I don't, I usually fail.
You know, the thing is, sometimes when we take that extra second to put a pin in there and line it up and not unsew, we're not wasting time, we're actually saving time. Yeah. So, and if you feel better that way, absolutely do it. Remember that you will learn as you go what works for you. Some of the things that I say that work for me may not work for you. It was just bunching a little bit, so I just had to help it along a little bit. And now that that's in there, I can take this bottom one, flip it over. I can sew it here on this white. I can also, if I want to, so I can see that intersection, I can flip it on and sew it from this edge. When you do that though, you have to make sure that we cut all our units apart and place them back on our design board to make sure that they're all not mixed up.
Is there anyone joining us from anywhere else in the world?
I heard the weather yesterday down in the southern Ontario was like 17 degrees.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh, I'm jealous.
Here in northern Ontario it was really cool, but we were still, I think, in single digits. And let's just cut. So now I can clip these apart. And they should be in order, but I want to make sure that because I flipped this one over on the back, it's going in the wrong direction. I want to make sure that I fix it before I go on. So now what I want to do is I want to press my seams. I could have done these ones impressed and then did these ones impressed. What I normally like to do, we don't do it because of the camera, but I will sew units like this together and then I will get up and walk to my iron. So it helps me stretch and I don't get too sore from sitting. So I like that a lot. So on our pattern, Tiffany has drawn some arrows, and that is in the direction that we want to press.
Tiffany just drew those on Cindy's pattern. They're not on the...
Oh, they're not on the regular one?
They're not on the regular one.
Okay.
I might be able to do that, but it might take me...
a couple more minutes?
A couple more minutes to get the upload up.
Okay. So...
This afternoon.
If you have to hurry up and get this done, just make sure that you're getting... write yourself a note that the middle row is pressing towards the 4 patch, and the top and the bottom row are pressing towards our bordered squares. So, taking my first strip, because I'm pressing towards my bordered square, I'm going to have that on top, set my seam, open it up with my fingers. I'm going to set my seam and open it up with my finger. Now, because I pulled my seam allowance, I could see going in the wrong direction. So I want to fix that, hold it, make sure they're going where I want them to go as opposed to where they want to go. This one I want to press towards my 4 patch, so I'm going to place my 4 patch on top. Here's a really good time to talk about seams. I almost always press our seam towards one side or the other, depending on the pattern or depending what I'm doing. Some people like to press open. So to press a seam open, they do that to reduce the bulk. So what that means is they would literally open up this seam. My hands are very dry today. They would press this seam open like that. I'm just going to go over my theory about why I don't do that. So,
which we did do.
We did do on one thing because we had to.
The queen size outer blocks. That's what we did.
Yeah, because there was there was so many tiny points coming together. We pressed.
Oh, we have a hello from Wes. I'm sorry, I'm butchering this name. Wiesbaden, Germany. 15 minutes from Frankfurt.
Oh, hi! How wonderful is that?
I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce that, but that's awesome.
That's pretty cool. Pretty cool. Anyways, so quilting, pressing to the sides. If you want to quilt a stitch in the ditch, it has a ditch now, and when I sew, I will be sewing on the actual fabric there. If I pressed my seam open and you tried to stitch in the ditch, there really isn't a ditch because your seam would be open. So you would be literally stitching on stitches and not actually on fabric. You could actually, with your needle, hit a thread and cut it. And then your seams would come undone. The other reason why I kind of don't like to do that, if your batting has a tendency to what they call beard, that could come through the seam. If I have my seams pressed to the side, because that seam allowance is blocked, there's no chance that bearding can happen. If my seam is pressed open, again, remember, all I have there is a line of stitches. So it's basically a stitch and a hole and a stitch and a hole. So the batting can beard through sometimes, depending on your batting, that line of stitching. But that's why I like to press to the side as much as I can, because like I said, if I did open it, I would no longer be able to stitch this in a ditch when I'm quilting, and I don't want to reduce that option. So now what I'm going to do is I am just going to sew my rows together. So I'm going to take my top row. Let me just cut this thread off here. I'm going to flip it right sides together, and I'm going to sew this seam. I have lots of seams that are nesting now. So remember, this one we pressed to the left, this one we pressed to the right. That's going to be a nesting seam, just like we talked about with our 4 patch. So I want to make sure that I pin that in place. I will also pin the end of my block to keep that lined up perfectly. I have my goose here that has to line up with my seam here. Whoops. There we go. Lining that up so my edges are together. I am going to have another nested seam here. Another good reason why I cut all the thread ends off, I have a very light fabric here. If I left all those thread ends hanging out, when I quilted it, you might be able to see some of those through. So this seam is nested really nicely. Put my pin in there, and then I'm going to go up to this side. So I think there's more than enough pins there. If you want, you can always pin these intersections as well. So now back to the sewing machine. Whoops! You did that again.
I did that again. I'm sorry.
We give people motion sickness.
We have another hello from Whitefish. From
Hi.
Val.
Hi, Val. Making sure that that seam stays in the direction that I want it to stay. Now that I've got past that pin, I want to line these up perfectly. I'm just giving this just a little tug so everything lays nice and flat, lining things up. Our phone is ringing. We're not here.
It'll go to answering machine. Eventually.
So there, I'm past that seam. Now I can sew to my next one. Sometimes you have to be careful when you're coming to a seam like this. Once it gets stuck in the foot, so I always want to make sure that it sticks down. I'm going to really hold this tight with my fingers so I can take this needle out so I can see this intersection. I hit it perfectly. Just guiding it back here. You can see that I tugged. I'm not pulling the fabric, I'm straightening it just so everything lines up really nicely. I don't want to sew over that pin, but I do want to sew over that seam before I stop. Lining things up again. I can feel my seam allowances here. I'm holding it with my finger to make sure everything is going in the right direction. Off to my end. And right down. So now with these seams, you can sew it or press it, sorry. Tiff, you don't have pressing instructions. Do you care?
Nope.
Okay, so because we have a flying goose here, it really doesn't want to press that way. So let's press towards our 4-patch. We still have like the other corners. It's, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. But I think that one might work a little bit better. Again, because it's a seam right there that doesn't want to fold in the right direction, I want to make sure that I make it go in the right direction. Again, this is one of those places some people might like to open the seam. I don't know how I'm going to quilt this, whether I'm going to custom quilt it. So I want to keep it the direction that I need.
Yeah, you're pressing it in the proper direction.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I had to look at a quilt layout.
Ah, perfect.
But you did it correctly.
Good. Okay, so now I'm going to take my next unit, place them right sides together, and once again sew this seam. So I'm lining up my end.
Oh, it'll work out.
Will it work out?
It'll work out.
I have an intersecting nesting seam here. So I'm jiggling it and wiggling it, making sure that it's there's no lump, that it's nice and smooth, and there's no valley. I can...
Whoops, I'm sorry. You moved.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
Okay, here's a really neat tip too. When you want to match a point like this, if you have a wool mat, you can place your pin straight down into the wool mat. Line up our seam here. See, I was out a couple threads actually. If I wouldn't have lined them up, it might have been off a little bit. Then when I pull the pin out, I can make sure my top edge is that way, but I'm keeping my pin perpendicular, and it should be lined up pretty close. Again, here's an intersecting seam. Here's a really good example of why I like to sew with a 2.0 and not a 2.5 like the sewing machine. I've lost a stitch here just because we've cut our units apart and we stretched our threads. So I've lost one stitch. It's not that big of a deal, but if I had a longer stitch, that would have been most of my seam allowance. So that's why we do like at the 2.0 stitch length. Again, this seam is butting up. When I sew with my 1/4 inch, I'm still going to have, you know, a couple stitches on top of my seam, so I'll be good to go. I was sewing yesterday. I'm making a quilt, and it has 1.5 inch cut squares, so they're 1 inch finished units. I reduced my stitch length down to 1.8. I needed a tighter edge because right at the edge I was having a couple that were undoing, and because it's such a tiny block, I don't have enough stitches in there to lose a couple. So I found it sewed much nicer when I reduced it down to a 1.8. Again, if I'm not using a pig, I want to hold my threads.
By pig, she means leader.
A leader, sorry. Yes. Leader, a beginner, and ender. There's a couple people that I know that have taken and have a little pile of 2.5 inch squares or 1 inch squares, whatever, and they use those as beginners of the row and an ender of the row. Then they can sew them together and make a scrappy quilt. So it's not wasting
any thread
at all. And it's also you're getting a bonus quilt kind of. So I have a seam under here, I can feel it, so I wanted to make sure that it stayed lined up. I've got this one going in this direction, sewing to it. Again, I keep lifting, and that usually makes the seams go in the right direction in case they've caught on the sewing machine and flipped in the wrong direction. So up into a pin. Lining this edge up. Coming towards the nose of my goose. I want to make sure this seam doesn't get stuck on my foot. Now I can line that up. My stitching is going right through that intersection. Because it's very bulky at the intersection, it's really going to want to push in the wrong direction. It'll want to push this way to go to the lighter part, so then you end up losing the nose. So that's why I slow down and take some time and let the machine work right through that thick part. One more seam to press. I want to press towards my 4 patch on this side as well, so I'll place my 4 patch up, set my seam.
Can I make you repress away from the 4 patch?
You want to press away from the 4 patch?
I do, because the next block I really... No, press to the 4 patch. I'm sorry.
Press to the 4 patch?
I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
That was a designer moment.
Yeah. Press to the 4 patch.
Okay. I want to, again, this wants to flip in the wrong direction, so I'm going to put my iron down. I am going to grab this seam to make sure that it's going in the direction that I want it to go. I can even grab underneath, make sure that everything is going in the right direction. I mean, if you know that you're just going to be doing, sending this to a long armor and doing an overall on it, and you feel more confident, you can press those seams open and reduce some of the bulk. But I'm okay with it this way. And there we have it. There is our first block. This is block 1. This should measure 12.5 inches. I don't have a 12.5 inch ruler here, so I can't test it. No! You know, that's a lot of pressure on camera. Thanks, dear. So this is a 12-inch finished block. So that means it should measure 12.5. So I'm going to find my 12.5 inch lines on my ruler and line them up on my edge as best I can, and then I'm going to peek. So I have just a little bit, can you see up here where my corners are? I have just a couple threads. I'm not going to trim that because it could throw things off. That could be just from ironing that I stretched it a little bit. So I am going to leave this little bit here, and I am going to make sure that it fits in the block. It should shifted sideways.
If it was
that much, then there's something wrong.
Then we unsew or see where our seam slipped or
exactly,
etc.
But predominantly most of my seam, especially where there was straight pieces, is pretty perfect. It's just where I have a seam, especially the corners, sometimes they stretch a little bit, so I'm good to go. Over here,
oh, you are out.
I'm out, so I am going to go back and revisit my seam and see what I did, because something is not right there.
You probably have too narrow of a seam there.
I might have too narrow of a seam on this side. If I measure this block here, where's my ruler? That should measure, because I have one seam allowance, it should measure 4 1/4. I have 4 1/4 with just a little bit. This one should measure 4. So I can see here that I have a little bit of excess fabric. If I measure this one here, I'm a little bit over 4 1/4. So that means this seam here, there's something the matter with this seam. So I am just going to, of course it's the seam that I sewed in the other direction. If I would have checked, actually, if I would have checked first when I sewed my 3 pieces together, I should have checked at that point and made sure that those units measured 12.5. So now that it's not, and I have to re-sew this seam, what I am going to have to do is I am going to have to clip here and clip here so it lies flat. Now, because my unit was too big, I can just re-sew this seam. So let's see how it goes. Oh, it's not going to work that way, is it?
We could probably fix that off camera.
We could probably fix that off camera. So what I'm going to do, because that seam was quite out, I'm going to have to unsew, and then I'm going to sew it back on. Because that was out too much for me. So, in the meantime, there is our almost 12.5 inch block. So,
and we'll be making 6 of those.
And yes, exactly. And the queen size people will only be making 6 as well. So we can, unless there's some questions, we can call it a day. I can sew the rest of these this evening because I think I'd like to get out and go for a little bit of a walk. I don't know how slippery it is out there, but
It was pretty slippery yesterday. I don't know about today.
It's sure a beautiful day out there.
Hopefully they sanded the sidewalks.
Yeah.
All right, I don't see any questions.
No questions?
Nope.
Perfect. All right, so let me unsew this and we will be back next week for week 5. Happy quilting, everybody. Bye now.